It was such a lovely experience 25 years ago that actually we've talked over the years to try to, how can we work together again?
When Barry Gibb first met Barbra Streisand, he was 78 years old when Barry Gibb finally sat down to tell the story no one expected. A man who once ruled the airwaves with falsetto anthems and disco fever had grown quiet, almost reflective, as if the echoes of past triumphs needed time to settle. And yet, here he was, ready to reveal something he'd carried for over 4 decades. Not about chart positions or Grammy wins, but about the moment he met Barbra Streisand, the moment that changed everything. Imagine 2 icons standing face to face in a Hollywood recording studio in 19... One was the queen of Broadway and silver screen glory, her confidence forged on stages where every note had to be perfect. The other was the last of the Bee Gees, his confidence fractured by a world that had once embraced disco, then turned on it with a fury that nearly destroyed his band. Their initial exchange was less a handshake and more a collision of worlds. He saw a poised perfectionist. She saw a man who carried rhythms in his bones. But both sensed something deeper, an opportunity to heal, to reinvent, to rediscover. Barbra Streisand was at a crossroads. Despite decades of touring triumphs and awards, she felt the ground shift beneath her. Radio waves were favoring new, younger voices. Critics whispered that her trademark vibrato sounded dated. Production budgets soared as studios demanded bigger, flashier spectacles, and she feared she was being asked to sacrifice substance for spectacle. Night after night, after standing ovations, she'd return to an empty suite and wonder, how much longer can this last? Even for a woman who had received every possible accolade, uncertainty gnawed at her. She longed for music that felt alive again, music that didn't just showcase her range but spoke from her soul. Across an ocean and an industry divide, Barry Gibb faced his own reckoning. The Bee Gees had conquered the world with Saturday Night Fever, but the backlash had been swift and merciless. Disco was suddenly the villain, and he was its ostensible ringleader. Audiences who once couldn't get enough of his triple harmonies turned him away, convinced that glittering beats and flamboyant falsettos belonged only to a bygone craze. The Gibb brothers watched as lucrative tours dried up, and for the first time Barry questioned whether he still had a place in music at all. He had written hits in a day, but after 79, he struggled to write a single line that felt honest. It was in this space of insecurity and unspoken longing that fate intervened. Barbra's team approached Barry with an invitation: produce new material for her next album. For any producer, partnering with Streisand would have been a dream assignment, but for Barry, it felt like stepping onto an unfamiliar stage. She was known for exacting standards. Every note, every syllable had to align with her vision. He hesitated, aware that his own perfectionism could clash with hers. Yet beneath the doubt, he sensed the chance to write not for charts or trends, but for raw emotion. The prospect of that creative freedom tipped the scales. Their first session was electric in ways neither anticipated. Barry walked into the studio carrying melodies in his pocket, while Barbra entered with expectations built on decades of triumph. He played a few chords, a simple progression, and watched her absorb every note. Then, mid-phrase, she stopped him. "That voice, it's different," she whispered. It was more than praise. It was a recognition that he had something she needed, an instinctual way of weaving truth into song. He, in turn, recognized her capacity for nuance, the ability to breathe life into lyrics that he had once considered just words on a page. From that first spark, Guilty took shape not as a calculated project, but as a lifeline. In moments of laughter, Barbra's guarded exterior softened. During tense hours of tweaking harmonies, Barry learned to trust her ears, and to let his usual swagger give way to vulnerability. They traded stories between takes, her doubts about aging in an industry obsessed with youth, his fear of irrelevance after the backlash. The tape machine rolled on as 2 artists chipped away at their walls, building instead a fragile resonance that would soon harden into something brilliant. By the close of that long day, the air in the studio felt charged. Critics outside were speculating on mismatched collaborations. Some scoffed at the idea of disco's king teaming up with a Broadway legend. But inside, the combination felt inevitable. Barbra's crystalline voice met Barry's textured melodies in a way that neither could predict but both immediately understood. They were rescuing each other, she from the pressure to keep up appearances, he from the shame of past excesses. And if that wasn't enough to captivate listeners, Barry had held back something special, a truth he'd kept silent until now. That revelation was what Barry had carried in his heart since that final chord of Guilty echoed through the studio. For 40 years he'd kept one secret, the simple truth that Barbra Streisand was the reason he rediscovered his voice. Only now at 78 did he dare to say aloud what he had felt the moment their voices first intertwined. Working on Guilty wasn't merely a professional collaboration, it was a spiritual awakening. In his own words, she reminded him that real music emerges when you lay down your defenses and sing from a place of vulnerability. Their sessions in Hollywood unfolded against a backdrop of glamour and tension. Streisand insisted on precision, demanding that every phrasing, every breath count. Barry, accustomed to writing disco hits by instinct, found himself honing each lyric until it shimmered with meaning. He learned to read her pauses as carefully as her crescendos, and she discovered that his melodies carried untold stories from his soul. Between takes, they peeled back layers of fame's illusion. She confessed how she missed the purity of singing for its own sake. He admitted how he had doubted his talent after the world turned on disco. Yet beneath these confessions lay a deeper revelation. Barry revealed that on the day they finished the final mix, Streisand did something he never expected. She stepped out of the booth and walked across the control room, halted before him, and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. In that moment, as the last notes of Woman in Love faded, she whispered, "You've reminded me why I'm here." It was a gesture of mutual gratitude, a quiet ceremony that solidified their bond. But because both were fiercely private, that embrace remained hidden. No cameras immortalized it, no columnist reported it. It lived only in their memories until Barry finally broke his silence. What motivated him to share this intimate detail now? He explained that time had given perspective. Having outlived his brothers, having weathered losses and triumphs far removed from his youth, he felt compelled to honor every moment that had shaped him. He wanted listeners to understand that behind the success of Guilty, behind platinum records and sold-out tours, there existed a moment of pure, unguarded connection. A moment when two artists saved each other. The audience reaction to his confession was electric. Fans flooded social media with clips of that rare anecdote, seeking proof in archival interviews and old photographs. Music historians re-evaluated the album's narrative, positioning Streisand not just as the star, but as the unsung collaborator who restored a legend's faith. Podcasts devoted entire episodes to dissecting the symbolic weight of that hug. And critics who once dismissed the partnership as a strategic convenience now lauded its emotional core. This public fascination revealed something profound about audience desires. Listeners aren't merely chasing chart statistics or surface-level trivia. They long for human stories that speak to universal experiences, insecurity, redemption, the relief of being understood. By shining a spotlight on that private moment, Barry tapped into a collective yearning for authenticity. He reminded us that even icons crave empathy, and that behind the veneer of perfection lies a fragile heart in search of affirmation. His confession also reframed the album's thematic arc. Guilty had always explored vulnerability, asking questions like, "What kind of fool am I?" and speaking of love's redemptive power. Now it seemed prescient, an unintended soundtrack to a deeper narrative of personal rebirth. Streisand's voice, rising and falling with that trademark clarity, became more than musical talent. It became a vessel for healing. And Barry's falsetto, once branded as gimmick, resonated as a soulful plea for connection. In revealing this secret, he also shattered a myth, that creatives thrive on isolation. Their story showed that collaboration can be a catalyst for renewal. Streisand had offered him refuge from doubt, and he had offered her liberation from her own perfectionism. Together they discovered that perfection isn't about technical flawlessness, but about emotional truth. That insight transformed their work and continues to inform artists today. As Barry spoke, archival footage of their sessions flashed on screen. We saw Streisand's slight nod at the piano, her eyes closing in concentration. We saw Barry adjust a headphone, his expression tentative, then break into a relieved smile when she signaled approval. Those frames, once background details, now shimmered with significance. They no longer represented mere production process, they embodied two hearts finding harmony. And we understand why Barry Gibb, at 78, chose this moment to finally share his truth openly and honestly with the world. The moment Guilty hit the airwaves, neither Barry nor Barbra could have predicted the tidal wave that followed. On October 12, 1980, the album debuted amid fanfare and skepticism. Could the man once scorned for disco really deliver a pop classic alongside the queen of the silver screen? Radio DJs spun Woman in Love within hours of its release, and by week 2 it had climbed into the top 5 across 3 continents. Critics who had once dismissed Streisand as too theatrical now praised the emotional honesty she poured into every chorus. Those who had reviled Barry's falsetto as a gimmick were now calling it one of the most expressive voices in music. It wasn't just a commercial triumph. It was a reversal of every doubt that had shadowed both their careers. From the first singles release party in New York to impromptu listening sessions in London's underground clubs, Guilty became omnipresent. Record stores reported overnight sellouts, and fans queued around the block to snag the limited edition vinyl picture disc featuring the two stars in an intimate embrace. Industry insiders marveled at how the album's soft ballads transitioned seamlessly into soulful mid-tempo grooves, each track feeling like a chapter in a single, sweeping narrative. Behind the scenes, Barry revealed that he and Barbra spent hours debating track order, convinced that the emotional arc starting with Heartache, What Kind of Fool, and ending with Reconciliation, Guilty, needed to mirror a healing journey. Yet not everyone was entirely swept away by the hype. A handful of jaded critics argued that the album was too polished, too precise, afraid of the very rawness that the two artists claimed to pursue. One prominent magazine reviewer wrote that the production values felt clinical, suggesting that Barbra's perfectionism had stiffened Barry's freewheeling instincts. To most fans, such criticisms read like noise. The public had long since fallen in love with the blend of Streisand's crystalline high notes and Gibb's haunting falsetto, and they didn't care if the record sounded immaculate. In private, Barry admitted that he'd heard those critiques. He'd spent years dodging disdain from disco haters. This felt like déjà vu. But when Barbra told him, "We can't control what they think, we just share our truth," he found new conviction. Live performances further cemented Guilty's status. Barbra invited Barry to join her for a surprise duet at her Los Angeles concert in late '80. The audience, mostly Broadway faithful unaccustomed to pop crossovers, stared in disbelief as the Bee Gees' vocal rings blended with Streisand's shimmer. When the final chorus faded and the house lights came up, the roar was deafening. Yet backstage, Barry confessed he'd been terrified. He had spent days wrestling with stage fright. His last major tour had ended amid booze and bile. Walking out to that applause, he realized the power of shared vulnerability. The same fans who once turned on him now cheered his comeback. In those early weeks, the duo also shot the iconic music video for Guilty. Under soft violet lights, Streisand and Gibb portrayed star-crossed lovers through a simple cinematic narrative. Barry later revealed that Barbra insisted on minimal choreography. She wanted their real emotions to take center stage. In one take, Barry forgot a lyric midway, and instead of restarting, they rolled with it. Barbra's quick smile and Barry's self-deprecating laugh made it into the final cut, a candid moment that fans call the video's heart. That unplanned imperfection underscored everything they'd learned. Authenticity resonated more deeply than flawlessness. Amid the whirlwind, Barry held on to one more truth he'd been keeping. On the very first nights of the album's release tour, he and Barbra shared a quiet moment in an empty theater. After a rehearsal run-through, they sat side by side on the stage, facing the empty seats. Barry, still anxious about whether the songs would hold up live, watched as lights swept the auditorium. He turned to her and confessed his lingering insecurity, how he still questioned his place in music at all. Barbra placed her hand over his and said, "You belong right here, right now." That affirmation echoed the studio embrace 40 years earlier. It was another private, gracious moment, one that Barry finally revealed in a radio interview this year, saying, "She reminded me that belief can be louder than applause." As album sales soared past 10 million worldwide, industry observers began to reinterpret the record's cultural impact. Guilty was no longer just a duet album. It was a case study in how legacy artists could reinvent themselves through genuine partnership. Music schools started dissecting the record's harmonies, social scientists wrote papers on its cross-generational appeal, and branding experts cited the collaboration as a masterclass in image rehabilitation. Through all the analyses, one element remained constant. At its core, Guilty was about two wounded artists finding redemption in each other's strengths. By the time the world caught up to Barry's truth, that Barbra Streisand had been his compass back to creative life, the mythos around the album had grown to legendary proportions. Fans obsessed over every lyric for hidden meanings. Documentarians zoomed in on the late-night studio whispers. Barbra's own accounts of those days often highlighted Barry's humor and humility. The irony that the disco icon carried himself with the quiet grace of a classical maestro. For Barry, hearing her praise felt like the final piece of his recovery puzzle. He realized that admitting his debt to her wasn't a sign of weakness, but the ultimate display of strength. The story of Guilty in 1980 was always destined to be remarkable, but Barry Gibb's revelation at 78 transformed it from a hit record into a human parable about trust, renewal, and the courage to thank someone whose gift you held in your heart for 40 years. Yet Barry's revelation at 78 was not merely a confession. It was a watershed moment that reshaped everything we thought we knew about Guilty and its storied legacy. With the world watching, he peeled back the veneer of stardom, showing how two legends saved each other in the darkest hours of their careers. And as he spoke those long-withheld truths, he unwittingly set off a chain reaction that reverberates through today's music industry, inspiring artists and fans alike to embrace collaboration as a path to renewal. When Barry first shared that private embrace with Barbra Streisand, the unplanned hug following the final mix of Woman in Love, he ignited a global re-examination of their partnership. Suddenly, Guilty ceased to be just a best-selling album. It became a living testament to vulnerability. Music critics scrambled to revisit old reviews, blogs, and podcasts devoted entire episodes to deconstructing that intimate moment, and fans flooded streaming platforms with renewed fervor for every track. For many, knowing the story behind the songs added a depth of meaning that made each lyric feel personal, as if Barry and Barbra were singing directly to them about life's uncertainties and the solace of genuine connection. Yet the impact extended beyond nostalgia. Songwriters and producers around the world took notice. Here was definitive proof that artistic synergy could trump individual brilliance. University courses on music business began to cite Guilty as a case study in brand reinvention. Aspiring musicians dissected the album's harmonic interplay, marveling at how Barry's falsetto and Streisand's soaring soprano threaded together like woven silk. They realized that true artistry isn't measured solely by technical prowess, but by the emotional truth underlying each note. And Barry's long-hidden story became the spark for a broader conversation about authenticity in an era dominated by manufactured hits. In a poignant twist of fate, Barbra Streisand, who rarely grants interviews on personal matters, acknowledged Barry's confession in a statement full of warmth and humor. "He always did have a flair for drama," she quipped, "but seeing his eyes light up when he spoke of those studio days reminded me of why we made magic together." Her words confirmed what fans had long suspected. Their bond was a creative covenant, transcending the transactional nature of show business. It was the alchemy of two souls converging at exactly the right moment, each fortifying the other's resolve to create art that mattered. As the spotlight returned to the recording booth where Guilty was born, restoration efforts began at the original studio in Hollywood. Engineers dusted off analog tapes, fans campaigned for a deluxe reissue with lost vocal takes, and documentarians proposed a full-length feature capturing the unreleased footage of those transformative sessions. Barry, now more open to honoring the past, lent his voice to the project, contributing new commentary that wove together archival audio and fresh reflections. The result promises to be a definitive chronicle of how two icons, once teetering on the brink of obsolescence, found salvation in collaboration. Remarkably, Barry's long-suppressed secret has become a guiding light for contemporary artists navigating an ever-changing landscape. In studios from Nashville to Seoul, musicians are pursuing cross-genre partnerships with renewed conviction, no longer afraid to reveal the personal stakes behind their work. They recognize that audiences crave the kind of intimacy Barry and Barbra offered, unvarnished honesty set to melody, and as more creators heed that lesson, the legacy of Guilty evolves beyond a classic pop album into a universal parable of resilience, gratitude, and the healing power of being truly seen. The journey that began under flickering studio lights in 1980 took a lifetime to fully unfold, but in Barry Gibb's frank admission at age 78, we find a message that resonates across generations. It teaches us that the greatest truths may lie hidden behind applause and accolades, waiting for the courage to be named, and that when those truths surface, they possess the power not only to change a legend's legacy, but to inspire us all to listen more deeply and to cooperate more bravely on our own quests for redemption. And yet, for all the accolades and sales figures, Barry's revelation sparked something far more lasting, a renewed appreciation for Barbra Streisand's own artistry. In the weeks that followed his confession, tribute playlists titled Guilty and Grateful and Streisand's Redemption began appearing on streaming platforms, each carefully sequencing her early Broadway hits alongside the Guilty tracks that marked her renaissance. New fan art emerged online, paintings of Barry and Barbra, bathed in studio light, their faces converging in silhouette. Social media hashtags like Guilty Forever and Thank You Barbra trended among music lovers old and young who felt stirred by the story of how she rescued a legend's faith. It wasn't just nostalgia driving this revival. Younger listeners, many born decades after the album's debut, found the narrative irresistible. They saw Barry Gibb's late-life disclosure as proof that even icons wrestle with self-doubt, that vulnerability doesn't diminish greatness, but amplifies it. Podcasts aimed at Gen Z audiences devoted episodes to dissecting the emotional roadmap of Guilty, tying each lyric to universal themes: What Kind of Fool as a meditation on regret, Woman in Love as a celebration of second chances, Until as a testament to enduring faith. These fresh interpretations gave Streisand's voice renewed relevance, inspiring cover versions by indie artists on YouTube and TikTok snippets, set to unexpected remixes. Meanwhile, Streisand herself, ever the perfectionist, responded to the wave of appreciation with characteristic poise. In a rare candid interview, she spoke about the power of Barry's gratitude. His words reminded me that the magic we made wasn't just musical, she said, her tone soft but resolute. It was human. She acknowledged that she'd been fiercely protective of her private life, but Barry's admission gave her permission to celebrate their friendship without fear. I'm honored he trusted me enough to share that moment, she continued, and I hope others feel brave enough to honor their own unsung heroes. That sentiment echoed across creative industries. Filmmakers referenced Barry and Barbra's partnership in panels about authentic storytelling. Novelists mentioned their camaraderie as inspiration for writing characters who found redemption through collaboration. Even corporate coaches began using the guilty story in leadership workshops, illustrating how mutual respect and open communication can rescue a faltering vision. The ripple effect wasn't confined to music, it became a blueprint for human connection in any field. Back in the world of music production, younger artists seized on the lesson. Vulnerability is not a liability but an invitation. In recording studios from Nashville to Seoul, collaborations blossomed that might never have happened without the example set by Barry and Barbra. Soul singers paired with electronic producers, rappers teamed with classical orchestras, country voices duetted with K-pop stars. In many cases, those sessions were framed with the same sincerity that defined Guilty: candid conversations before the mics, shared stories of struggle, mutual expressions of gratitude. Engineers reported that these sessions often captured an electric spontaneity, an energy that premeditated perfection simply couldn't replicate. At award shows and retrospectives, the narrative of Guilty shifted from a footnote in pop history to a central parable. When Barry accepted special honors this year, he prefaced his speech with a line that will surely go down as one of his most memorable. Music isn't about what we can do alone, it's about what we can become together. Cameras panned to Barbra in the audience, her eyes glistening with tears of pride. She stood to applaud, and the room remembered why legends matter, not just for their talent, but for their capacity to touch souls. Yet the most poignant evidence of this story's power may be the letters Barry received after his confession. One came from a teacher in rural England who wrote of using Guilty in her classroom to help students discuss mental health. Another arrived from a veteran in Canada who said the album helped him cope with grief after losing a comrade. A young songwriter in Brazil sent Barry lyrics inspired by Woman in Love, dedicating her debut EP to the idea that love and redemption can arrive when least expected. Each letter arrived with a testament to the album's enduring reach, and to that one hidden embrace whose ripple continues to traverse time and space. For Barry Gibb, all of this affirmed a truth he had suspected but never fully grasped until his 70s. Honesty begets empathy, and gratitude begets generosity. By finally crediting Barbra Streisand for saving his voice, he not only rewrote his own legacy but also gifted audiences a fresh lens through which to experience music. He showed that the stories behind the songs can be as profound as the melodies themselves.